If your culture oppresses women, it's time to change it. For 25 plus years, intrepid Canadian journalist, human rights activist Sally Armstrong has been reporting ghastly cases of worldwide abuse of women. Everything from heinous war crimes and child rapes in dangerous regions to oppressive regimes that kill girls, force them into early and multiple marriages, and refuse to educate them. In most countries, Armstrong visits the thugs in power, justify violence in the name of culture, and tell her, "You are not from our culture. You have no right to write about us." In her usual fashion, she ignores them. Stay with us for war correspondent, activist, revolutionary Sally Armstrong and her take on the ascent of women, why the world can no longer afford to oppress half its population. It is my pleasure to be here with you today and with visionary, brave, on-the-ground journalist, equity seeker Sally Armstrong. She is my friend, and she is a woman of moral courage and international heft. Sally is a three-time Amnesty International Award winner, a member of the Order of Canada, and author of startling true books. Her new one is called The Ascent of Women. Most women know if they want change, they have to do it themselves. Well, most women of our age know that.
Yeah, we learned that lesson, Fanny, didn't we?
We sure did. Well-behaved women rarely make history.
It's an old quote.
It is. I can't remember who said it, but it's an old quote. Well-behaved women rarely make history. So, what prompted Ascent of Women?
Well, as you know, I'm a journalist. I cover zones of conflict, and I cover it from the point of view of what happens to women and girls. I've been doing it for 25 years. Fanny, about 3 years ago, I started to feel the earth shifting under the status of women in these places, even in places where women are hopelessly oppressed. And I didn't think maybe in my lifetime we'd get some better results, but I started chasing that kind of research, found out I was right, and decided to write the book because, as you said in your introduction, the bottom line here is the world has discovered they can no longer afford to oppress half the population.
Jane Jacobs, the late Jane Jacobs, said something like that. You know, it doesn't make economic sense to oppress women.
Well, there's so much evidence now. Jeffrey Sachs, the Millennium Goals economist, claims the economy and the status of women are directly related. Where one's flourishing, so is the other. Where one's in the ditch, so is the other. Now everyone's jumping on that bandwagon.
Well, we have made some progress, as you know, because they're no longer burning us on hills as they were in the, 16th, 17th century.
That's right.
The stories in the book, in spite of all we've heard and read, are still so shocking.
They are.
Take me to Croatia, the Croatian grandmother, Eva. What happened to her?
Well, this is a very basic reason for why I wrote this book. Eva Penović was gang raped by the military in the Balkans during that catastrophe in the 90s. She was a grandmother, for heaven's sakes, when she was gang raped. I was there in Sarajevo doing a story on the effect of war on children when I began to hear these rumors about rape camps. And you know, as a journalist, we know that the first casualty of war is often the truth, and I thought, it must be a casualty of war. This is before Congo, before Rwanda. But as the day went on, I realized what they were telling me had to be true. So I quit, and I was working for a magazine. I could race this story to press in about 3 months.
Was that Homemakers?
It was...
Chatelaine?
No, it was Homemakers. I gathered all the information I could. I brought it back. I gave it to a news agency. I said, give this to a reporter. This is an extraordinary story. It never appeared. 7 weeks later, I called the guy back. I said, what happened? He said, I forgot. And I thought, 20,000 women were gang raped, some of them 8 years old, some of them 80 years old, and he forgot. And I decided, we're going to make it our story. So at Homemakers, 2 days later, I was on the plane, went back, found Eva, did the story, and it was because of those women in the Balkans that rape became a war crime in The Hague.
And rape has been a war crime for centuries.
Since 1998. It was allowed before that. You know those old stories about, oh, the soldiers rape and pillage, and then take it to a more, a softer place. They say, oh, boys will be boys. Baloney. This is rape. This is a crime.
And this woman was canning tomatoes in her pantry. 12 men shot the hinges off the door or something like that, dragged her to a field and to the soldiers' headquarters or something.
Yeah. And they raped her.
And they raped her and
Yeah.
raped her.
They raped her orally, they raped her anally, they raped her vaginally. I mean, the level of horror is almost unspeakable. But you know, Fanny, the interesting thing, it was very hard to find someone who wanted to talk about this because there's so much shame attached to rape. And that's what the perpetrator has always counted on, that you would be too ashamed to tell. But Eva was so mad, she said, I want to give a name and a place to this horrible incident so the world will know.
Well, as you know so well, and you said it, if you can't talk about it, you can't change it.
That's right.
And the silence around so much of this, in spite of all the social media and all our connections today, the silence about what is really going on in a place like Senegal.
Yeah. Well, but these are the changes. The women are now talking. And when you can talk, you can ask questions, excuse me, that you never dared to ask before. And in Senegal, the women said, why do we practice female genital cutting? They call it excision there, they're French. And they couldn't find an answer. The imams and the village chief said, oh, it's our culture, it's our religion. They said, well, show me where it is in our religion. Couldn't find it. Then if it's part of our culture, why do we do it? Who's benefiting from this? Couldn't find the answer. So the women of Malikunda Bambara said, that's it. We're not doing it anymore. Never again, not my daughter. 7,000 villages joined them. Senegal will probably be the first country where the women eradicated female genital cutting.
They used to call it, or maybe they still do, female genital mutilation, and it is what exactly?
Well, it depends on where you are. It is the removal with an old razor, usually rusty, of all your genitalia, from the labia to the clitoris, and then they stitch you shut with thorns. I mean, it's so brutal, it's so awful. And someone says, this is none of your business. This is cultural. This isn't cultural, it's criminal. It is so my business. So when the women themselves began to talk, they started to make the change. They say FGM will be history probably in 5 years.
And some of the men as well are saying, not my daughter.
Yeah. But this is happening all over the world. I was in Cairo doing the Women of the Arab Spring, and I noticed that the young men are with the young women trying to make change. In Afghanistan, an extraordinary group called Young Women for Change has formed, and they've got young men with them. Now, there's a big backlash for the men who stand up beside the women and say, no more violence. But they're standing there.
The women in Palestine.
Oh, now this is an incredible story. I always felt that the women were the route to peace in the Middle East. You know, women can't afford war. They can't afford to have the farmland littered with landmines because they've got to grow some food to feed the kids. They can't afford to have the schools closed and the street mixed up because they have to take care of the children. So there were a group, it was called the International Women's Commission, that the UN formed, 10 Palestinian women, 10 Israeli women, and no, it was 20 Palestinian women, 20 Israeli women, 12 internationals, to see if they could find the path to peace. But the commission collapsed.
But what happened about aren't they called the Women in Black?
Well, that's another organization that's working, in fact, around the world. But they work very effectively in Jerusalem, and they stand on very busy street corners with their placards about the need to establish a peace. But we know that so many people have gone to the table with almost exactly the same formula. 1967 borders, an independent Palestinian state, and then it collapses. You know what the women told me? They said that the negotiators count on this kind of a collapse. They say, yes, we'll meet next Tuesday. And on Monday they say, you know what, we can't meet till Friday. And on Friday they say, et cetera, for 50 years. And nobody's called them on this.
Dr. Seema Samar, you talked with me about last time, who acted against the Taliban in Afghanistan to keep the schools open. What is she doing today?
She is chair of the Independent Human Rights Commission, but aside from that, and very interestingly, Seema is part of a new political party, and it's the first time that a political party has seen 4 different tribes come together in Afghanistan, and that is the way forward. I believe firmly it's the women that can move this country into the very primitive country into the 21st century. But bringing the tribes together in one political party is certainly a start, and Seema is part of that.
And as we pull out of Afghanistan and the U.S. pulls out of Afghanistan, what has changed for the women?
A lot has changed. You know, we focus on the insurgency. We focus on the 4 southern provinces. In fact, there's 34 provinces in Afghanistan. A lot has changed. They've got a heck of a long way to go. But I believe quite firmly they will continue to stumble forward. I do not believe the Taliban is the threat people are making it out to be. It's a small group, a ragtag bunch of 20-something illiterates with 6 or 8 guys who can read, and they're getting a lot of ink, but I don't believe they're coming back.
But so many of the girls can't read because they're not honored in the family.
Well, you know, in Afghanistan they have an expression. They refer to their illiteracy as being blind. And I said, "What do you call it being blind?" And a woman said to me, "I couldn't read, so I couldn't see what was going on." I thought in fewer than a dozen words, she totally hit the nail on the head. But education is the key. It's the key to everything in every place. And in Afghanistan, and I can tell you that Canadian women are very responsible, grassroots women, for getting those kids to school. There's a thing called Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan. They have an organization here in Vancouver, and they raise the money, A, to get the girls to school, B, to pay the teachers and to improve the ghastly teacher training they have. So this is the way forward, is education.
I couldn't agree more. And some of the women I respect immensely, the Hillary Clintons of the world, are right there with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think most of the sane men I know are on side too.
This is the other thing I'm noticing, Fanny. The young girls are starting to sneer at old men with old ideas because the fundamentalists, you whisper the word change and they will accuse you of trying to westernize the country or trying to turn the women into whores. And they're old, out-of-date, power-clinging ideas, and the young people are sneering at them.
Sure, back to the "you dress like that, no wonder you were raped."
We had that here.
We had that here, I remember, and they finally took it out of the courts, and it didn't matter about your background when you were involved in a sexual assault of some kind. And the young girls, the 10-year-olds, like in Senegal, are standing up.
Well, there's a story in the book about a little girl called Kadia, and she was in school. They're very excited, you know, to be going to school. She was in school, and her uncle walked into the school, yanked her out of the classroom, and took her off because she was now going to be married to, I think he was a 39-year-old uncle or something.
And she was 10.
And she was 10 years old. But what happened, and again, years before, nothing would have happened. That would have been the end of Kadia's schooling and probably the end of, certainly the end of her childhood. All the other kids in the class walked out behind her, went to the village chief's office and started demanding that something be done about Kadia, and it was done. Someone ran to the highway from this village where there was a phone and alerted the media in the city, and everybody came and covered it. This was a real turning point.
No kidding.
Yeah, 10 years old.
Yes. Now, this is not just happening in the third world, as you know. Right here in beautiful British Columbia, we have Bountiful.
What a disgrace.
What a disgrace, and a very interesting court decision that nothing really happened about. And on it goes. Daphne Bramham, as you probably know, wrote a book about Bountiful and certainly writes columns after columns, and not much has changed. Let's talk about that when we come back.
Okay.
Okay. And we will be back with feminist hero, human rights activist, international journalist Sally Armstrong in a few minutes.